Okay. Good morning. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you all had a good coffee. And thank you for having me. I love coming to Paris, and this is terrific. It's my second time in Paris this year. I want to talk a little bit about great product design, which is so important to successful products. But I want to start with this. You guys see this upstairs? Right, this is fascinating to me. I think I came in this morning to look at this chart to see where the focus of the pain points are that you are seeing within your organizations. And there's a couple that struck me, kind of some of the top ones. The first one is this one, users and customer satisfaction. Hugely important. Seems to be the most popular item up there at the moment, right? This one's really interesting, improving quality in general. And there's so much to quality, right? It's not just the quality of the code or the quality of the delivery, but it's the quality of the experience of the products that we're building, because great experience is what sells products these days. And it doesn't matter if you're B2B or B2C or whatever. Reducing costs, again, very important. One of the factors of reducing costs is not building things that people don't want, right? And then lastly, becoming more agile and becoming more reactive. And I'm going to talk about not just being more reactive, but being more proactive. And that's what this talk is about. This talk is about understanding how to deal with this from a customer-centric point of view. It's extremely valuable and extremely important to know who the customer is, what their pain points are, and most importantly, what solutions they actually value to those pain points. And I'm going to talk about different ways that you can do that to ensure that you're building, optimizing, and designing products that people actually want to use. I want to start my talk with this slide. I don't know if you have raccoons in France, but I do love this slide. I found this on the internet, as you can find most of these things. Do you have raccoons in France or in Europe? No, you don't, right? They're horrific animals, terrible creatures. Really, I'm not really sure what the value is of a raccoon. They bite children and they bite dogs. And so this gentleman, his dog got attacked by a raccoon, and he set up a trap, and this is what he caught. Now, the reason I show you this slide is because we do this all the time. If we're lucky enough to ship product, Jeff was saying this morning about the high rate of failure in actually just shipping software. But if we're lucky enough to ship a product, we actually have no idea how it will get used, or if it will get used the right way, or if it will actually solve a real problem for a real customer, until we actually put something in the customer's hands. Or at the very least, put an approximation of the experience of using that product in the customer's hands. And so it's our job, and in fact, it's our responsibility to make sure that the products that we put out on the market actually do the things that we expect them to do, and they solve real problems for real people. Because what we end up doing instead is we end up building features and features and features that don't actually solve any real needs. And my favorite recent example of it is this thing, right? Remote controls are a terrific example of feature bloat, right? Ultimately, we need them to do three things: turn the TV on, change the channel, and change the volume. And yet, right, how many buttons does every remote control have? I have a friend, actually, who works for a company in New York that recently got acquired by Samsung. And they work on the future of television. So they build remote controls and physical devices and software, and they make these amazingly beautiful, simple devices that do one, two, or three things very well, and then they ship them off to Seoul, South Korea for approval. And he tells me that every design that they send to Seoul comes back with 1 to 3 extra buttons for every SVP that reviews the design. Okay, and that's where we end up with this. And so our goal is to figure out how to build products that people actually want, how to build the features, how to choose the features that make the most sense, and then how to optimize and improve the design of those so that people can actually use them. I want to share with you 2 really quick case studies about failure to do this, and failure to actually do this. This is a company called Plantcast. How many of you remember this company? They don't exist anymore. That's why you don't remember them, right? Plantcast launched about 4 or 5 years ago in Silicon Valley. It was a startup that was a social event sharing startup. You sign up, You create an account, and then you post where you're going to be. I'm going to the Lean IT Summit in Paris. I'm going to the Agile Conference in Orlando. I'm going to this meetup or this party. And the thinking was that people were interested in broadening their awareness of what's happening in their social circles. And so the gentleman who started this company worked on this idea for 5 months. They were serial entrepreneurs. And so when they launched the idea on TechCrunch. And immediately the company saw tremendous adoption. Up and to the right, all the numbers are looking great, and then flatlined, and then it tanked, and then they sold their assets, and they were done. Now what's fascinating is that in 2012, after the demise of the company, the founder of the company wrote a post-mortem on TechCrunch, which is appropriate. It's where they were born. It's where they died. And there's some really interesting takeaways that I pulled from that. So here's the first one. He talks about the initial launch. The initial launch proved extremely exciting, and it misled them into thinking there was a larger market ready to adopt their products. They're seeing their numbers go up and to the right. Now remember, these are serial entrepreneurs with entrepreneur friends in Silicon Valley being supported by VCs. And so they're assuming that the people who are signing up for this are quote-unquote normal people, when in fact, the people signing up for the service were their friends and their friends' friends in that Silicon Valley bubble. Now, but they're seeing these numbers, 100,000 registrations, and 230,000 people visit each month, which is terrific, and it makes you feel really good. And this is what the lean startup folks are calling vanity metrics. They're called vanity metrics because they make you feel really good about your product or your feature or your service, but they don't tell you what people are actually doing with that product or service. So terrific, 100,000 people have registered. Did they share a plan? Did they follow someone? Did they create a profile? Did they come back more than once? Did they come back ever? Did they come back more than once a month? That's the kind of activity that indicates that you found true traction and product market fit. Instead of these metrics that give you a sense that people like it. This is terrific. People often tell me, I like Plantcast, but I never have any plans to share. This whole service centers around a social object that people don't have. 5 months of work spent, their time, somebody else's money, to launch a service to share a thing that people don't have, right? Was there an opportunity for them to learn this before they did that 5 months worth of work? This is another one. For those few people who do actually have plans to share that they found interesting enough or worthy enough to post, it turns out that when you share those plans, it doesn't give you that same warm feeling, that fuzzy feeling you get from sharing a picture of your kid or your lunch or your dog or your feet on the beach or whatever it is that we're seeing in all the social networks, right? And again, is there an opportunity to find this before we spend 5 months of work building this system? Finally, the team took a philosophical stance against an invitation feature. We're not having it. That's it. That was their decision up front. And the reason they decided to do this was because they didn't want to become another Evite or another invitation service. They just wanted to make people aware. And in so doing, by making this assumption up front that they were not going to do this, what they ended up creating is an anti-social network. Right? A network where people are aware of all these amazing things that are happening around them, in theory, but don't feel invited or welcome to attend them in any way. And that ultimately led to the demise of the service. And the question again, was there an opportunity for them to find this out before they spent 5 months worth of their time and somebody else's money building the service? And the answer, of course, is yes. And we'll go through some techniques to show you how. My second case study of failure is a company called FormSpring. How many of you have heard of FormSpring? That's because they're dead, right? They don't exist. Now, FormSpring, also really interesting. Set up a profile, ask me anything. That's the service. Anyone can set up a profile. Anyone can be asked anything. And the initial days, it was fascinating. Again, they launch up and to the right. Everything is perfect. They flatline, they tank, and they die. The designer from this company wrote a blog post, a post-mortem about what went well and what didn't go well while he was working there. And I pulled one quote out of there that I thought was really fascinating. One project this company worked on was the idea of a social media sharing button. So think about tweet this, like this, pin this, right? They thought, we've got so many users, we've got so much traction, it's not that big of a stretch to think that people also want an Ask Me Anything button in addition to all of those other buttons that are already on every blog post. And so what they did was they spent 2 months of effort building the infrastructure to support the traffic that would come when people would click this button. They spent 2 months of effort designing the workflow of what would happen when you click this button. And they spent 2 months of time building content and media relationships in order to ensure that the button was included on all of these websites that they wanted it to be on. And it turns out that no one clicked the button at the end of the day. 2 months betting on somebody else's idea. Right? Well, everybody else does it. We should do it too, right? I'm sure you've never heard that in your company. Right? Betting on that idea only to find out that nobody wants this feature. It doesn't make sense in the workflow for this product. Was there an opportunity for them to learn this before they invested all of that time and effort? And of course, the answer is yes. And the main reason, the fundamental shift, and I know you guys have been talking about this the last couple days, is this. The nature of software has changed. Right? We're no longer shipping software in boxes on shelves or on physical media. Software is continuous. We do continuous deployment. We ship regularly. And regularly doesn't have to mean once a week at the end of a sprint or daily or whatever it is. It could mean just once a quarter even. But what this has done is it's fundamentally changed our ability to determine what to build. Because of this continuous process, what we've done is we're building a continuous feedback loop with our audience, with our market. We can launch something, and we can measure it, and we can assess what's working and what's not, and then react to that change as quickly as we can push software out there. And that allows us to determine very, very quickly if we're building things that people actually want, and whether we should invest further in optimizing those experiences. Let me put a fine point on this. This is how often Amazon pushes code to production. Let me say it again. This is how often Amazon pushes real bits to real people somewhere in the world. Okay, 11.6 seconds. That's ridiculous, right? But here's the key thing to remember is this, okay? They are not redesigning the checkout process 5 times a minute. Right? They're not redesigning the product page 5 times a minute. They are taking tiny bites of risk, and they're launching it to a tiny segment of their audience. And they're watching, and they're measuring, and they're learning, and then if it was a good idea, they optimize it, they scale it, they broaden it out. And if it doesn't seem to be moving the needles in the right direction, they roll it back. And so the scope of the failure is tiny, right? Work in small batches, right? But the scope of the learning is huge. We keep taking a step from doubt to certainty, this continuous position of humility, and it's that continuous cycle of software that allows us to build that conversation. And Amazon does it 5 times a minute, okay? And so what this does is it helps us answer some key questions. The first and foremost is how long do we wait before we launch something? Do we wait 5 months? Do we wait a week? Do we wait 18 months? Right? Other questions. How do we define the right requirements for our product? How do we decide what to build? Right? This continuous conversation helps us. And then finally, what signals are we looking for from the market to tell us that this was the right thing to build, that we've designed it well, and that we should work more on this particular idea? In other words, we should invest more in this particular topic. Here's some things to think about. First and foremost, requirements are actually assumptions. Okay? They're guesses. Just because they're called requirements does not mean that they are required. They are somebody's guess about what they believe will actually solve a real business problem. And most companies work this way, right? This is essentially, look, some of my best friends are product managers. I'm not picking on product managers, right? But the point is that this is essentially what we're tasking our product managers, our business analysts to do, is to divine answers to these business problems and then define them up front, and then give them to teams to execute in a very, in an agile fashion. Right? This is how most companies work. And what we have to do is we have to walk away, we have to step back from this kind of, well, let's assume we know all the answers up front, and start to build a more experimental approach. It's a philosophical shift in our organizations where we build a this culture of experimentation and a culture of learning that says we don't know. Right? We're going to take the fact that requirements are actually assumptions, that we don't know all the answers about how to solve this business problem, and we're going to take these tiny bites of risk and validate them through this continuous conversation with the marketplace. It fundamentally shifts the way that we think about things, right? First of all, it shifts our thinking from requirements to assumptions, right? Educated guesses based on what we currently know and what we think we know, right? And that changes the language that we use. And this is key, this is critical, right? Changing just that one word from we know to we believe opens up conversation. Right? If we tell somebody we know this to be true, then someone has to execute it. It's unquestionable. If we say we believe, all of a sudden it changes the nature of the conversation, and there can be a dialogue about, well, how do we know? How will we know? Right? And then the actions, the tactics, the next steps that we take go from let's build it right away to let's test it. Let's make sure it's the right thing to build before we invest heavily in that particular direction, right? It's the old adage, nail it, then scale it. Let's find the right thing, and then let's scale it. And so you've heard a lot about different ways to do this. I'm going to tell you about a couple of other different ways to how we can actually do this. The first and foremost is this, design thinking. Design thinking is a really interesting concept that's been around for a bunch of years now, and a lot of people have been talking about it. It spawned from IDEO and defined by Tim Brown, who's the CEO and president of IDEO. He talks about it as a style of thinking that combines three elements. The first is empathy for the context of a problem. Empathy means understanding what the pain points are, what the customers are feeling, and what the real problem is that you're actually trying to solve. What's the root cause, the root thing that you're trying to solve? The second is creativity in the generation of solutions. Now you'll notice it doesn't talk about creatives. It talks about creativity. Creativity is in all of us, designers, engineers, product managers, executives, business analysts, and so forth. Designing a lot of ideas, and then most importantly, rationality to analyze and fit those solutions to the context. In other words, let's find the solution that actually works, not the solution that we love the best, but the solution that actually solves a problem, and then let's use that to solve this pain point for our customers. So you take this idea of design thinking, and then you combine it with this idea called Lean UX, right? UX standing for user experience, right? Which it turns out in 1978, Yoda shared this with Luke in the swamp, and then I talked to Luke about it, and it was cool about that. But what is Lean UX? Let's talk about it. I've gotten some new glasses since this photo. But Lean UX, inspired by Lean Startup. So I'm sure you guys have heard a little bit about that in the last couple of days, and Agile development theories. And it's the practice of bringing the true nature of a product to light faster. Product, feature, service, whatever it is. Right? The true nature of a product is the experience of using that product. How do we get there sooner? And then how do we do it in a collaborative, cross-functional way with our partners in design, engineering, IT, product management, marketing, sales, right? Focusing less on creating deliverables, documents, right? You remember Jeff's chart from this morning showing the NASA graph where it's like big document, handoff, big document, right? Focusing less on documenting everything and focusing more on building a shared understanding amongst that cross-functional team of that actual experience, of the customer, and of the pain points that we're actually solving for that customer. And the way we do that is we start to prioritize learning over growth. The most important thing we have to do first is to learn, to understand whether or not the user exists. Believe it or not, we take a lot of guesses about the user, whether the user has a real problem that we can solve, and whether they value a solution to that problem. I've worked on several projects where there was a real user and a real problem, and they simply didn't need anything to fix it. They had found ways to solve it. Right? We have to learn those things, and we do that by declaring our assumptions around a business problem. And these have to be a 360-degree view of the business problem that we're trying to solve. We want to talk about the customer. Who's the customer? Who do we assume the customer to be? What do we assume their problem is? What do we think will actually solve that? What is the outcome the customer is actually trying to get out of this? Ultimately, it's not just to do my job better. It's to get a raise. It's to get home sooner for my kid's soccer game. It's to lose weight. It's to find a date. It's whatever it is, right? How do we get customers? Who's going to be our early adopters? How do we make money? Who are we competing with? What's our key competitive advantage, right? If you take this just to give you a sense of, like, just to contextualize these assumptions around that plan cast. Remember the story about plan cast, right? Who was if they had sat down and thought about this, you know, maybe their customers, they're socially active young professionals, right? Maybe, I'm taking a guess, right, if they had done this. And the problem that they're solving is they want to stay aware of interesting events in their social circle. We think a social event sharing network will do that. And the achievement is an increased awareness and attendance at events, and maybe people get smarter and get new jobs. How do we get customers? Meetups, Twitter promotions, maybe TechCrunch, right? Who are going to be the early adopters? It turns out there's Silicon Valley techies, VCs, entrepreneurs. How do we make money? Right? It's important to talk about this stuff up front, right? This was an issue for them. And who's the competition? Well, we're competing against Evite, Facebook, Outlook, Meetup. Some stiff competition, right? What's our key competitive advantage? We don't invite people, right? Right? We don't know. When you sit down and you try to answer these questions, these holes in your thinking come up. And it gives you an opportunity to really tackle the deeper issues, right? And we take these assumptions and we turn them into hypotheses, right? And the language for the hypothesis looks like this. We believe, right? We believe, we don't know, that building this feature or this product or this service for these people, let's get very explicit about who we're building for, right? We're talking about 34 to 45-year-old stay-at-home moms. We're talking about the IT worker who manages the knock. Whatever it is, right? We'll achieve some kind of outcome for that user, okay? Now here's the key component of the hypothesis statement. It's this. This is your definition of done, and this is your definition of success. How do we know? What are we going to measure? What's the signal from the market that we're looking for that will tell us that this was the right thing to build, that we've designed it well, and that we should invest further in this idea? That's the key. This is your definition of done, not shipping the feature. Thank you. So take PlanCast for a second, right? If we rewrote the PlanCast business model as a hypothesis, it could look like this. We believe that creating the ability for people to share events will provide them with better awareness and greater enjoyment of their social circles, right? That's the hypothesis. How will we know it's true? We'll know it's true when we see people signing up for the service and coming back to the service at least 4 times a month and sharing at least 2 plans a month and following at least 5 people, right? The types of activities that indicate that people find value in this thing. Those are the things that we should actually measure. Let me give you another example of failure. This one is directly from my experience. I worked for a company in New York called The Ladders. Wow, really? A company called The Ladders. The Ladders is a job board, and at the time, it catered to people who made $100,000 or more. And what happened was the company founder saw the numbers flatlining. And so he decided that we were going to create a new service called the Job Search Advisory Service, which would give every paying member of our service a job search advisor in New York. And that person would answer all your emails and handhold you through the job search process. We took 9 months and 50 people's worth of time to build this requirement. Okay? We had to rebuild everything. We had to install a call center and write scripts and hire people and redesign the customer acquisition flow and all the marketing and all the revenue streams and everything. And at the end of the day, 6 months after we launched it, we shut it down, because it didn't move a single one of those numbers, because it wasn't presented to us like this. It was presented like the requirement as opposed to the hypothesis. If it was presented as the hypothesis, we could have gone after one of the core assumptions in here is that 55-year-old men who make $200,000 or more with 30 years of working experience, because that was our customer, would value job search advice from a 22-year-old college kid. Right? Because that's who we hired to give them college advice, job advice. right? If it was presented to us like this, we could have tested that and found out that we shouldn't invest 9 months and 50 people's worth of time in that. But we weren't. We were presented as a requirement. And so that, right, that could have given us a sense, a better way to define our products. We could have articulated our assumptions, defined our hypotheses, and then run these lightweight tests. We could have simply given this service to 50 people who are already paying money. Right? We could have assigned a product manager and a UX person or whoever, and just given them the service and see if that changed their behavior in any way. Do they tell their friends? Do they renew their subscription? Do they find a job? Right? That's ultimately what we're there to do, right? To find that out. And then we could talk about what outcomes we'd actually measure success. Right? And so what this does is it changes the conversation about not what feature are we building, but what problem we're trying to solve. And then the question becomes, how will you solve it? And then most importantly, how do you know it will work? What are we looking for? Right? And then what ultimately happens here is it changes the way a team approaches a project. It changes the way we measure progress. Right? So many organizations that I work with measure progress as output, as the features that we're building, as opposed to the outcome we're trying to achieve for the customer and for the business itself. Now, to clarify that, output is the stuff that we make. It's features. Right? Outcome is a measurable change in customer behavior that you can attribute to that output. In other words, we built this and people did something differently that we can accurately correlate to that. Now, there's a third component called impact. Impact is a high-level measure of the business's health. Net promoter score, customer satisfaction, revenue, profit, right? We want to focus our teams here at the outcome level because we can directly tie a feature or a service to that outcome. It's much more difficult to say we increased profits because we improved login success rates. Right? That's the teams can see their work. Now here's the key. I'll share with you this quick story. Works as designed is no longer good enough. Just because you shipped it the way it was defined is not enough. This is a picture of my gym. This is where I work out when I'm home in New Jersey. This is my favorite feature at that gym. It's called the cardio theater. It's a dark room, like this room, with a big screen and speakers, and they play a movie. And you can run on the treadmill while you watch a movie on the big screen, instead of a little screen or with your headphones on. All right? I love this feature. I come in at 5:30 every morning. The movie's playing. It's terrific. The guy who opens the gym comes in at 4:30. He walks back there. He turns the lights on. He pushes play on the movie. He sees the picture. He hears the sound. And he goes back to the front. And he never goes back there again. Works as designed, right? I come at 5:30 with a bunch of other people, and as soon as you get more than one person running on a treadmill back there, you can't hear the movie anymore, which makes it a useless feature, undesirable. I don't want to use it anymore. So I have to get off the treadmill, I have to go back to the front and get the guy to come turn up the sound. Right? Works as designed is not good enough. We have to make sure that the experience is good and that people are actually want to use this product, because you can launch all the features in the world and they can still suck, right? Feature after feature after feature. Just because you've launched it doesn't mean it actually solves a real problem for customers, right? And so what we do want to do is we want to focus our teams on achieving actual outcomes. And so one more quick case study from the ladders, a good one this time. So when I worked there, one of the things that we realized was that we needed to improve the way that job seekers and employers communicate. Now, we had a metric for this, and the metric was job seeker response rate. It was the number of times a job seeker responded to an employer through our system that we could measure. Now, we took this project on, and the current job seeker response rate was 14%. 14%. It's terrible. Both people are paying to use the system, and no one's talking to each other. We took a team, and we said, your job is to move this number from 14% to 75%. That's it. That was the requirement the team was given. They could do whatever they want as long as they move that number from 14% to 75% in a scalable way. In other words, something that was eventually automated and eventually scalable. And so we took a cross-functional team together. We took designers, engineers, product managers, and QA, and we put them in the room, and they brainstormed a bunch of ideas. And they worked closely together, and they prioritized some solutions, and then we ran a set of rapid experiments. And over the course of 3 months, the team moved the number from 14% to 38%. Did they fail? Right? It's more difficult. It's much more difficult to manage to an outcome than it is to an output. An output is binary. Right? At 3 months, the team went up in front of the company and said, we've been working for 3 months. We've experimented on a bunch of solutions. We're at 38%. Will you fund us for another 3 months? And the organization said, yes, you're making good progress. You're learning a lot of new things. And we got another 3 months. And at the end of 6 months, we got to 68%. Again, through lightweight sketching, experimentation, A/B testing, and then scaling out of solutions that actually moved the needle objectively, that improved job seeker response rate. And at 68%, the company said, you're good. Let's move you on to the next thing. And what this does is it allows you to collect data objectively and to make decisions based on those objective observations, evidence-based decision-making. Are we changing customer behavior in a way that's important to us? And if so, let's keep doing more of that. And so when you get that data, when you've collected enough data, you end up with 3 choices inevitably, right? The first is that it's a bad idea and that we should kill it, right? Before it kills you. Right? This is a bad idea. Don't do this at home, okay? If the data says it's a bad idea, kill that idea, okay? Sometimes the data's a little murky. It says, listen, you're headed in the right direction, but you're not getting there fast enough. That's when you pivot. You've heard this term a lot, right? You maintain your strategy, but you change your tactics, right? And then sometimes you find the right idea. That's when you double down. That's where you nail it and scale it, right? When the data says that this is a good idea and this is something that we should move forward on, that's when we double down and move this thing forward. Now look, here are the easy parts of doing this. The easy parts is measuring. Not done so well necessarily in most companies, but it's easy. You can instrument your software to measure analytics, usage, metrics, talk to your customers, qualitative data. Here's another easy part, talking to customers. It's really easy. Just walk outside, go find your customers, have a conversation, and find out why they're behaving in certain ways, which is great. Another easy part, pausing and reflecting, retrospectives, decision meetings, whatever it is, right? Discussions of learnings and progress. All of this is easy. A lot of companies don't do this, but this is easy. Here's the hard part, changing course. Right? Once we actually get to a point where we've learned that even though we've worked on this for 6 months, or for that plane that Jeff showed, that $143 billion plane, just because we've sunk all these costs into it, it doesn't make sense to do this anymore. Changing course is the hard part. That's where organizational maturity and discipline plays in. Right? Reflecting, measuring, and so forth, that's the easy part. And so what we're ultimately doing here is that we're mitigating risk by not building things that people don't want, right? Why would you do that? To me, that's the ultimate form of waste, right? The ultimate form of waste is building something that people don't want. It's a waste of your personal time, it's a waste of your team's time, and a waste of your company's time. And I want to share with you one more quick case study, and then I'll wrap up and take questions. You guys heard of this company, Xiaomi, the Chinese electronics manufacturer? They're taking the world by storm. And the reason they're doing this is because they are starting to build this rapid, iterative, customer-centric, evidence-based decision-making methodology into hardware development. And the way they do this, for their phones at least, is this. They release 100,000 phones every Tuesday at noon. And within hours, not days, they start to collect feedback from customers. Quantitative and qualitative feedback is collected immediately. And within hours, not days, they get that feedback back to the engineers. And within a week, they have an iteration on not just the software, but on the hardware. Because they're putting customers at the center of their product, and they're working their hardware process, manipulating it so that they can move this forward. And as you think about this way of working, think about this. These ideas behind a customer-centric way of approaching the work, lean UX and design thinking, they're not just for designers. We need to bring in the cross-functional teams, right? Because we need to bring in the perspective from engineers and from marketing and from product managers, right? We need to build empathy for the customer across the spectrum of the people who are building products, which teaches people why we're building those things. And then ultimately, we learn more and we learn faster by sharing the discovery and the creation process. We build that shared understanding so people know why we're doing certain things. And so the reason we do this, why do we want to define the right product working this way, is this. First of all, it reduces time spent building the wrong product, the ultimate form of waste, in my opinion. It builds team-wide momentum and shared understanding. Right? Everybody's moving forward in the same direction, and they understand who we're solving problems for. It ensures that our resources are spent on the right initiatives, and we do this by shifting the way that we work and the way that we think from requirements to assumptions. Right? We focus on outcomes. Can we change customer behavior? We work together as a team to come up with ideas that the whole team owns, right? It's not just somebody's alone genius thinking of solutions. And then ultimately we have to test those ideas ruthlessly. And if the data comes back, the quantitative data comes back and says, this is not the right approach, we have to change course. And that's how we work this with the customer. So thank you very much for listening. I would love to take some questions, and my book's available upstairs, and I'd love to give you a copy at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.